What if what you fear most within yourself was, paradoxically, the deepest source of your strength? Imagine for a moment that what you hide, repress, or reject is also what could liberate you, transform you, and connect you to your most authentic essence. This is not just a philosophical provocation, but a truth explored by Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst who gave us the concept of the shadow. The shadow is the hidden side of our psyche, a repository for all that we consider unacceptable or incompatible with who we believe we are. But what would happen if, instead of running from or denying it, you learn to embrace it? The answer might lie in the wholeness we seek in our lives. The journey we are about to explore is both individual and universal. It's not just about you or me, but about all of us. The shadow is not a curse, but an invitation to integration. When we face it, we stop living in fragments and move toward a life that is more aligned, more balanced. Today, we'll dive deep into this concept, crossing the philosophical and spiritual waters surrounding it. We will reflect on how the shadow manifests in our lives, in social dynamics, and even in our creativity. Most importantly, we will discuss how confronting it can not only transform the individual but also heal the wounds of the world. The shadow, as Jung defined it, consists of aspects of ourselves that we avoid acknowledging. These are traits, desires, and emotions we reject because we deem them inadequate, dangerous, or incompatible with the image we want to project to the world. But the shadow is not just a dump of negative characteristics. Often, within it reside untapped potentials, talents that have been neglected, or parts of our humanity that were lost along the way. It is ultimately the reflection of all we hide from ourselves. If we look at this concept through a philosophical lens, we can relate it to the balance of yin-yang. In the Taoist symbol, we see that light contains a point of darkness, and darkness contains a point of light. They are not opposites but complementary. One cannot exist without the other. Likewise, in our psyche, the shadow is not something to be eradicated, but something that is part of our wholeness. Recognizing it is acknowledging that light can only shine because there is darkness around it. In spirituality, the shadow can be seen as an expression of the unknown divine within us. Many spiritual traditions talk about the need to confront what is hidden, what lies in the shadows, in order to achieve enlightenment or transcendence. It is as if what we reject is an essential piece of the puzzle that forms our soul. Illuminating the shadow is not about destroying it, but integrating it, bringing it into consciousness with love and compassion. The shadow is, therefore, a paradox. What we fear is also what can set us free. The question that remains is, are you willing to explore what you hide from yourself, to look into the darkest corners of your psyche, and to find what is valuable there? Because until you do, you will always be at war with yourself, dividing your energy between what is accepted and what is rejected. But why do we repress the shadow in the first place? This is a question that takes us deep into how our identities are shaped from childhood. From an early age, we learn what is considered good or acceptable in our families, communities, and cultures. Rules, social norms, and morality teach us to behave in certain ways to be loved, respected, or accepted. However, the flip side of these rules is that everything that doesn't fit these standards is pushed into the unconscious. It's as if we construct a persona, the self we present to the world, while hiding everything that doesn't seem suitable or acceptable. Think of anger, for example. Many people grow up hearing that feeling angry is wrong or ugly, that good people are always calm and controlled. As a result, they repress this emotion, not learning how to deal with it or use it constructively. But repressed anger doesn't disappear. It manifests in other ways such as unexpected outbursts, resentment, or psychosomatic illnesses. And this applies to many other traits: vulnerability, ambition, sensuality, or even creativity. Everything that doesn't align with the image we want to project is sent to the shadows. This repression creates a constant internal tension. No matter how much we try to hide or ignore these aspects, they do not disappear. They find ways to emerge, often unconsciously, in our behaviors, thought patterns, and relationships. This is where projections arise, when we attribute to others what we deny in ourselves. The colleague we judge as arrogant may be reflecting our own difficulty in handling self-confidence. The partner we call selfish may be mirroring our own inability to prioritize our needs. As Jung pointed out, this repression is a cycle. The more we deny something, the more power it gains in the unconscious. What we resist persists. And furthermore, this constant struggle consumes our psychic energy, distancing us from who we truly are and preventing us from living fully. Integrating the shadow, therefore, is not just an act of self-knowledge, but also a path to inner freedom. To understand the dynamics of the shadow, we need to explore its relationship with the ego. The ego is the conscious part of our psyche, the identity we build to navigate the world. It's like the captain of a ship, making decisions and directing our thoughts and actions. However, the ego often operates under the illusion of total control, trying to maintain a consistent and acceptable image of who we are. This insistence on creating a clean identity free of contradictions is what gives rise to the shadow. The shadow, on the other hand, is what lies outside of this conscious construction. It is the unconscious that exists deep within, out of immediate reach of the ego, but still influencing our choices and behaviors. This duality may seem conflicting, but in fact, it is complementary. The ego and the shadow are two sides of the same self, and true fulfillment arises when we find harmony between them. In Jung's philosophy, this process is called individuation. It is the path to wholeness, in which we accept and integrate all aspects of ourselves, the conscious and the shadowed. It's not about overcoming or eliminating the shadow, but about recognizing it as an essential part of who we are. It is the recognition that the human being is a union of opposites, a constant dance between light and darkness. Think of it as the balance of a scale. If we lean too far to one side, the side of perfection or the idealized image, the shadow becomes heavier, pulling us down in unexpected ways. But when we recognize both parts, the scale finds its balance, allowing us to live more authentically and integratively. This balance also helps us better understand our emotions and reactions. When something deeply bothers us or provokes us, it is often the shadow calling our attention. These moments are invitations for reflection, to investigate what the ego is trying to avoid. Thus, instead of denying or ignoring these reactions, we can see them as opportunities to grow and deepen our self-awareness. The shadow, though typically relegated to the unconscious, is far from invisible. It manifests in subtle but powerful ways in our daily lives. Imagine a moment when someone said or did something that triggered a disproportionate reaction in you, a strong irritation, an immediate judgment, or even an inexplicable discomfort. This is a classic example of the shadow projecting itself. Projections are one of the most common ways the shadow expresses itself. When we judge someone for being arrogant, insensitive, or selfish, it may be because those traits, repressed within ourselves, are finding an outlet through others. The shadow uses the external world as a mirror, reflecting what we do not want to recognize within us. However, these projections are not only negative. Intense admiration for someone, especially for qualities you feel you do not possess, can also be a sign of the shadow trying to point out forgotten or denied potentials. In our most intimate relationships, the shadow can create both challenges and opportunities. Think of a recurring conflict with a partner or friend. Often, arguments arise not just from differences, but from how each person projects their own shadows onto the other. Recognizing this is the first step to interrupting these cycles and cultivating more conscious and healthy relationships. In the workplace, the shadow can also appear. That colleague who irritates us deeply may be showing us something about ourselves that we are avoiding, like our own need for validation or our difficulty in setting boundaries. These moments are not easy, but they can be incredibly transformative if we face them as learning opportunities. This understanding completely shifts our perspective on emotional triggers. Instead of seeing them as something to eliminate or avoid, we can use them as guides. Ask yourself, why does this bother me so much? What is this situation trying to teach me about myself? The answer may be uncomfortable, but it could also reveal a path to integration and balance. With practice, we begin to realize that these manifestations of the shadow are not enemies, but allies in our journey of self-awareness. They show us where there is still work to be done, where we still need to grow. And by accepting these challenges, we find a strength that once seemed inaccessible. The shadow is not just an individual matter. It also manifests collectively, reflecting the repressed and unresolved aspects of entire societies. Just as we deny certain traits within ourselves, groups, cultures, and nations often project their shadows onto others. This can manifest as prejudice, intolerance, inequalities, and even global conflicts. We can observe this collective shadow by looking at the darkest moments in history. Wars, persecutions, and discriminations often have roots in a society's inability to recognize and deal with its own internal contradictions. Instead, these societies project their fears and insecurities onto others, creating divisions that perpetuate cycles of violence and suffering. Racial prejudice, for example, can be seen as a collective projection of fears and repressed traits that a society prefers to attribute to another group rather than confront them within itself. This collective shadow also appears in the systemic injustices we see today. Economic inequalities, social exclusions, and environmental damage are reflections of how we collectively repress values like empathy, responsibility, and connection with nature. By ignoring these essential parts of our humanity, we create imbalances that affect not only our lives but also the future of the planet. Spirituality offers a transformative perspective on how to approach this collective shadow. Practices that cultivate empathy, compassion, and acceptance are not only tools for the individual, but also for the healing of the collective. When we recognize our own shadows, we become less likely to project them onto others, creating space for more conscious dialogues and reconciliation. Recognizing the collective shadow is, therefore, an act of spiritual and political courage. It challenges us to look beyond divisions, to confront the deep roots of conflicts, and to work toward integration. This does not mean ignoring injustices or romanticizing hardships, but facing them with clarity and purpose. Every small act of empathy, every gesture of acceptance, contributes to the healing of a larger wound. Imagine a world where, instead of denying our flaws and fears, we learn to accept them as part of our shared humanity. This is the invitation of the collective shadow, to transform our common darkness into an opportunity for unity and growth. Interestingly, the shadow is not just a burden or a source of conflict. It can also be a powerful source of creativity. Many of the greatest works of art, literature, and innovation have emerged from a deep dive into the creator's shadows. Artists, writers, and thinkers often explore their most repressed parts, turning them into creative expression that touches the souls of others. Think of authors like Dostoevsky or Kafka, whose works delve into the complexities of the human condition, moral dilemmas, and inner abysses. They didn't avoid the darkness. Rather, they embraced it as a source of insight. Music is also full of examples. Bands, composers, and poets often translate their inner struggles into songs that resonate deeply with millions of people, showing that pain, conflict, and fears can be transformed into something beautiful and universal. This connection between the shadow and creativity teaches us that our repressed parts can be sources of inspiration, not just suffering. When we access what is hidden, we open a portal to ideas and perspectives that we could not reach otherwise. Allowing ourselves to explore the shadow is allowing ourselves to create without fear, without the limitations imposed by judgment or the need for acceptance. If you want to explore your shadow creatively, a practical approach is to use writing or art as a means of expression. Take a moment to freely write about your repressed fears, frustrations, or desires, without censorship or concern for the final result. Let the words flow, even if they seem disconnected or uncomfortable. If you prefer a visual approach, try painting or drawing your emotions. Don't worry about technique or aesthetics. The idea is to allow your shadow to find a way to manifest. Creativity offers a safe space to dialogue with the shadow. By placing these repressed parts onto a canvas, into words, or into music, you begin to transform them, giving them form and meaning. This process not only aids integration but also reveals that the darkness within us contains treasures waiting to be discovered. In addition to creativity, spiritual and philosophical practices offer powerful and practical tools for working with the shadow. These practices not only help us identify repressed aspects of ourselves but also create a space of acceptance, where we can begin to integrate them consciously. One of the most accessible practices is journaling or reflective writing. At the end of the day, take a few minutes to reflect on moments that triggered intense emotions. Irritation, shame, admiration, or even a feeling of disconnection. Ask yourself, what does this emotion reveal about what I'm repressing? Don't worry about finding definitive answers. Writing is a space for exploration, not judgment. The more honest you are with yourself, the more insights will arise. Meditation is also a deeply transformative practice in this process. Try a guided visualization where you imagine the shadow as a character or an energy within you. Not as something to fight, but as a visitor to be listened to. Ask the shadow, what do you want me to know? Why are you here? This practice can bring unexpected answers and open an internal dialogue that once seemed impossible. Another interesting method is what we call the inner mirror. Look at yourself literally in the mirror and observe what arises. not just in terms of physical appearance but also in feelings and thoughts. What do you avoid facing? What stories does your mind try to tell to justify or hide these reactions? This exercise may be uncomfortable but can also be incredibly revealing. Simple rituals can also create a deeper connection with the shadow. For example, before going to sleep, write down something you noticed as part of your shadow that day. A fear, a judgment, a repressed desire. Embrace it with compassion, maybe even thanking this part for revealing itself. Then, burn or keep the paper as a symbolic act of acceptance and transformation. As Jung said, what you resist persists. By resisting the shadow, you feed the cycle of repression and projection. But by creating a space where it can be heard and accepted, you transform resistance into integration and find a peace that once seemed unattainable. The shadow can be understood as the dragon that appears in many mythological stories, the mysterious and terrifying force that the hero must face on their journey. This archetype, present in cultures around the world, is more than a metaphor. It reflects the universal truth that in order to find our true power, we need to confront our deepest fears and the parts of ourselves we prefer to ignore. In the hero's journey, as described by Joseph Campbell, the protagonist leaves their comfort zone, faces challenges, falls into abysses, and finally confronts something that symbolizes the unknown. This something is usually a monster or a dark entity that holds a treasure or revelation. This monster is not just external. It symbolizes the hero's shadow, what they need to integrate in order to become whole. The act of facing the dragon, then, is not about destroying it but about transforming it. We can see this reflected in modern stories. Think of Luke Skywalker facing Darth Vader, an enemy who, at the core, reflects dark aspects of himself and his lineage. Or Frodo in The Lord of the Rings, carrying the burden of the ring, a symbol of the temptations and corruptions that live within all of us. These characters don't become heroes because they avoid their shadows, but because they face them and learn from them. In the spiritual and philosophical context, this journey is deeply personal. Each of us is called to face our own dragon, which may manifest as fears, traumas, repressed desires, or self-deceptions. Confronting the shadow is not a battle that you win, but a redemption, where you recover lost parts of yourself and discover strengths you didn't know you had. This journey teaches us that working with the shadow is not a linear or easy path. There will be resistance, pain, and moments of doubt. But there will also be moments of clarity, reconnection, and, ultimately, liberation. The shadow ceases to be an enemy and becomes an ally, a guide that takes us to unexplored territories of our soul. When reflecting on your own journey, ask yourself, what is your dragon? What is it trying to show you? Simply recognizing this question is already a powerful step toward transformation. When we integrate our shadow, the benefits go far beyond the personal. This transformation impacts all aspects of our lives, from our relationships to how we connect with the world. The first great gift of integrating the shadow is authenticity. Stopping the rejection of parts of ourselves means abandoning masks, external expectations, and the need to conform to rigid ideals. This is not just liberating, it is profoundly human. Being authentic is not about being perfect but about being whole. Authenticity brings with it an inner balance that makes us more resilient in the face of challenges. When we no longer fear our hidden parts, we gain a greater ability to handle difficult emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Anger, fear, or sadness cease to be threats and become signals, allies that show us where we need attention or change. This balance is not passivity, but a quiet strength that comes from fully accepting oneself. This integration also impacts the world around us. When we stop projecting our shadow onto others, we become more understanding and compassionate. We begin to see others more clearly, not as reflections of our insecurities, but as equally complex beings, struggling with their own shadows. This transforms our relationships, bringing more empathy and genuine connection. On a collective level, the impact is even greater. Imagine a world where more people work to integrate their shadows instead of repressing or projecting them. Entire societies could move toward greater justice, understanding, and balance. Individual healing inspires collective healing, and every person who commits to this work becomes a spark of transformation. Integrating the shadow does not mean achieving a final state of perfection or enlightenment. It is an ongoing process, a dance between light and darkness that defines the human journey. With every step, we become more conscious, more connected, and more whole. This is the true power that resides in the shadow, the ability to transform, to rise, and to connect deeply with who we really are. We've reached a point where it's important to look at all of this from a perspective of hope and action. Working with the shadow is not something that happens all at once, but a process that requires patience, commitment, and courage. The good news is that every small step on this journey makes a significant difference. Recognizing a projection, embracing a feeling you once judged, or simply reflecting on your triggers is already a way to bring light into the darkness. The most important message is that the shadow is not something to be feared. It is a portal to your deepest strength, to your truest potential. Instead of trying to fight it, why not start dialoguing with it? Why not listen to it? The resistance we feel in facing these parts of ourselves is, in fact, a reflection of their importance. Where there is resistance, something essential is waiting to be revealed. I invite you to share in the comments something you've learned about your own shadow. What aspects of yourself have you realized you've been repressing? What steps are you willing to take to confront and integrate these parts? Your story could inspire others to begin their own journeys, creating a cycle of transformation and collective growth. If this video brought value to you, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This is just the beginning of a deeper conversation about self-knowledge and spirituality, and your presence here makes all the difference. Share this video with someone you believe could benefit from this message. After all, when we illuminate our shadows, we inspire others to do the same. Thank you for joining me in this reflection. Remember, the shadow is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of something greater, something only you can discover by accepting it as part of your being. Until next time.